What if I told you that screwing up didn't have to keep you down? Like, you don't have to lay in bed thinking about the fact that you said you too when your waiter said, "Enjoy your food." Or the fact that you absolutely bricked the game-winning free throw. Or maybe that all of the online schooling with your children has made you realize you're not smarter than a fifth grader. What if I told you that everybody that you look up to is a total screw up? That's right. Some are just better at hiding it. Some are better at owning it. But in every way, God can use all of it. So don't let screwing up keep you down.
Welcome. Before we start, would you please bow with me for a quick moment of prayer? Father, we thank you for drawing us all together here today on this Palm Sunday. As we learn from your word together today, we ask your Spirit to bring the words to life in our hearts and minds. God, I pray that as I speak, my words will be your words and that you will be glorified. Amen. So a few years ago, I had an experience in which my expectations went unmet. For most of my growing up years, I was a dancer. I participated in all forms of dance: jazz, tap, ballet, hip hop. I was part of a team that competed nationally, and we placed in the top 12 a couple times. We were pretty good. The problem with dance, though, is that when you become an adult, there just aren't a lot of opportunities for you to dance. You can sign up with a studio to take a dance class as an adult, but they're going to make you wear a costume, and they're going to make you perform the dance for people, right? And so for me, I'm not doing that, okay? Some people enjoy that. It's not for me, right? So I was thrilled when a few years ago, Alex LaGuardia, we know Alex, we love her, and as it happened, she's gone today. I'm so bummed. She, who has made a career of dance, choreographing conventions, dancing professionally, she invited me to an open dance class. And she assured me that this class had people of all ability levels and ages on most nights, and the thought of dancing again sounded so good. Yeah, you know where this is going, right? It sounded so good to me, so I signed up. So I went and I paid my money, got in the class, saw Alex, gave her a hug. And it did not take me long to realize that not only was I the oldest person in the room by around 2 decades, but I was also the only non-professional dancer. Yeah, and so then I started to panic and I wanted to leave, but I'd already paid my money, I'd already seen Alex, didn't want to disappoint her, and then the class started, and I really couldn't leave. Okay, so we get into the warm-up. And I'm feeling really good. I start to weep, actually, because dancing feels so good again. And I start to think, okay, I can hang. I got this. And I'm in it. And the reason I was in it and I felt good is because our eyes were closed. We had to close our eyes for the warm-up. Then we had to open our eyes and learn the dance. And that's when things really took a turn. And the next 30 minutes are a complete blur. The weeping intensified. I was so frustrated with my body and with my inability to grasp the choreography. I was sweating, I cannot tell you. And then I realized that I'm sliding on the ground. I'm sliding around. And I realized that in 30 minutes' time, I have developed a massive blood blister on my toe. It has ruptured, and now there are bloody footprints all around my area. So I went, got some paper towels, wiped it up, went to my car, texted my friends, and cried. The end. The end. Because of what had happened in my past, because I was a fairly successful dancer in my past, I expected that things were going to go very differently. I assumed that I would waltz in after 20 years and 3 babies and just do a form of dance I'd never done and do it really well. And that's not what happened. And I was left feeling disappointed and disillusioned and confused. And we all have experiences like that, right, where things don't turn out the way we hope that they will, the way that we expect them to. And I think that's one of the reasons we identify with Peter, the subject of our current series. We learned last week a little bit about Peter. We learned, Meredith introduced us to his story through his calling. We saw how Jesus called Peter in from his fishing and said, "You've been fishing for fish. Come with me and we'll fish for people." And then we saw Peter walking on water. And we saw that he became overwhelmed by the wind and the waves. And in the first story, we saw Peter demonstrate what Pastor Meredith called reluctant obedience. And in the second story, we saw him demonstrate what she called impulsive obedience. And we learned that what is required of us as believers is not perfect obedience, but lifelong obedience, right? And so I want us to dig in a little bit more to the character of Peter as we continue on through his life. Today, our focus will be the following of Peter. And we have one key passage in mind as we go forward. So what do we know of Peter? We learned last week that he was a fisherman. He was a little bit rough around the edges. He likely had a fairly minimal education, sort of the traditional education that was afforded to boys of his culture, but he was working with his dad on a fishing boat. We know that Peter was married. Don't know much about his wife, but we know that he had one. And we learned that Peter was a bit impulsive. He could be a bit of a hothead, and we'll see that more as we get into his story. But I want to talk for a second about Peter's given name, the name that was given to him by his parents, Simon. There were a lot of little Simons running around at this time, and that's because in the year 167 BC, there was a revolt called the Maccabean Revolt, in which a band of Jewish rebels overthrew the Seleucid Empire, which was trying to impose Greek customs upon the people. And the leader of this revolt was Judas Maccabeus, and he had a son called Simon Maccabee. And so this band of people had overthrown their oppressors by force. And Simon carried this knowledge and this expectation with him throughout his life, right? That a Messiah would come and overthrow the oppressors by force. But as we know, Jesus was a very different kind of Messiah, right? And as this is Palm Sunday, I want to share this interesting fact. When the Maccabees overthrew the Seleucid Empire, the people celebrated by waving palms. And Judas Maccabeus had an image of the palm stamped into their currency. And so the people, when Jesus came riding back into Jerusalem, waved palm branches because they were expecting him to overthrow the oppressors by force because of what had happened in the past. Isn't that interesting? So Peter has been called. He's answered the call. He has walked on water with Jesus. He's seen Jesus heal and cast out demons. He's been with him for a while. And today our key passage is Matthew 16:13 through 25. I want to set the scene for us just a little bit. You know I love to do this. So he's taken them to a place called Caesarea Philippi. This is a region of Galilee located about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. And depending on where they started, I'm going to say around Capernaum, which was kind of their home base for ministry, this would have taken them a while to get there, about 2 days on foot. So it's pretty remote, pretty out of the way. It was a non-Jewish place. It was a center of pagan worship. And the primary god that they worshiped there was Pan, the Greek god Pan. You'll know him as the one with the hindquarters of a goat and the torso of a man. He was the Greek god of nature, and he was often worshipped in beautiful natural settings, which is what Caesarea Philippi was. Not only was it a center for pagan worship, the worship of pagan gods, it was also a center for emperor worship. And it was actually named for Herod's son, Philip. There was just this idea that governmental leaders were worthy of worship, and Caesar himself was a god. So wild and debaucherous things took place at Caesarea Philippi. There were animal sacrifices, temple prostitution of all kinds. It was very dark. My dad has studied this area and been there a few times, and he likens it to the Las Vegas of Galilee, right? Like just a symbol of all that is worldly. So I want to show you a rendering of what this must have looked like in the days of Jesus. Do we have that? A picture of what that looked like? Not so much. So we have this beautiful natural setting. And we have all of these temples, not only to the god Pan, but to the emperor. And one of the temples was built in front of a cave that was set back into a rock wall. And we'll revisit that here in just a minute. Today, the site looks very different. It's just rubble. It's just rubble. There was a stream and a waterfall that flowed. Here we go. All right, so you see this temple on the left and how it's kind of built in front of a cave. Remember that as we move forward. The next picture is a picture of what it looks like today. Yeah, so you can see just rubble. You see some rubble from columns. The cave is there on the left. Okay? In front, all of this is built in front of this massive 70-foot rock wall. Remember that as we continue. So I can just picture Peter as they are making their way to Caesarea Philippi, 2 days on foot. I can just picture him. Are we there yet? He seems like an are we there yet kind of guy. I don't know. I just picture that. Are we there yet? What are we doing? Where are we going? Why are we going there? Jeff was joking the other day, and he said if Jesus were CEO, Peter wanted to be COO. And I thought that was a really good descriptor. So Matthew 16:13 says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Then he asked them, but who do you say I am? Here Jesus uses Son of Man, which is one of his favorite designations for himself, or maybe better translations would be Son of Humanity or fully human one. But the implications here are that most people don't have the full picture of Jesus, of who he is yet, right? And they don't. The answer that they give is, well, one of the prophets, because of what had happened in the past. They were expecting something different. And so Jesus says, okay, I know who most people say I am, but what about you? You, my closest people, the ones who have walked with me, who have watched my every move. You. And I can kind of picture them like kind of slumping down or maybe like moving behind each other because the answer they had given just wasn't it. And so who speaks up? Of course, Peter. Verse 16, Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It was clear to Peter that Jesus was Messiah, the anointed one, the one who could save the people, human and divine, though he fully didn't get that. And I love Jesus' reaction here. As a former teacher and student pastor, it's like you're leading your students along a journey of learning, and one of them gets the right answer, and you go, yes. And that's what I picture Jesus doing. Jesus replied, this is verse 17, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. Here Jesus reminds Simon of his new name, Peter. The name Simon, remember, had carried with it those messianic expectations, which were a positive thing in some respects. But Jesus was not the Messiah Peter expected, right? That'll become really clear in just a minute. But Jesus says, now you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And there's been some debate over the centuries about what exactly this means. Does Jesus mean that he is the rock? Peter is the rock? Peter's confession is the rock? Lots of different interpretations over the centuries. But I think it is clear here that Peter will be instrumental in building Jesus' new community. You were Simon. Now you are Peter. I am the Messiah, but not the kind you expected. I'm doing something new, and you are going to be a big part of it. I want to pause here and say something more about the setting. In the first slide, you saw that temple that was built in front of a cave. Can we show a picture of that cave? This is a little bit more detailed photo of the cave. It's built back into that rock wall. In the days of Jesus, this place had a 30-foot waterfall. Today, it has slowed more to a kind of a trickle that feeds down into a series of marshes. But a river flowed out of the base of Mount Hermon, which was nearby also. And This back of this cave had a deep pit with an underground spring. And Pan worshipers would throw sacrifices down into the pit because this pit was believed by the ancients to be the actual gates of Hades, the gates of hell, the underworld, the realm of the dead. I don't think it was lost for one moment on the disciples as they were standing near to what they believed to be the gates of hell, the realm of the dead. And I don't think it was lost on Peter either, as they stood in front of this 70-foot rock wall that Jesus reminded him that his name meant rock, the name Peter, which comes from the Greek Petra, which meant a rock ledge, cliff, or massive rock. Scholar Adam Hamilton and pastor says, there before this massive wall of stone at the base of Mount Hermon, Jesus once more tells Simon he sees something in him that quite possibly no one else saw or could see, likely not even Simon himself. It was his willingness to take risks, his boldness and courage, his conviction and commitment that would make him a rock upon which Jesus would build his community. Let's get back into verse 19. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. This is rabbinic language that would have meant that Jesus was giving authority to Peter to interpret scriptures and Jewish law. And he says he'll give him the keys to the kingdom, which means that Peter would have control of the gates of heaven, meaning he would have some influence about who came in. And this is why you'll hear songs and jokes about St. Peter at the pearly gates, and why you'll see Peter holding keys in art throughout the ages. And then in verse 20 we see, then he sternly warned the disciples not to tell anyone that he was Messiah. This is because of that messianic expectation. Jesus knows that if people find out he is the Messiah, he would be captured by the authorities. And Jesus still has work to do, so he tells them not to tell anyone yet. So if this is where the story ended, great, right? Especially for Peter. He has been given the gold star. He's been given the gold keys. He gave a beautiful, profound answer to the question Jesus asked, who do you say I am? But as this is a sermon series about screwing up, it doesn't end there. We take a turn. Verse 21. From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. But Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Heaven forbid, Lord, he said, this will never happen to you. I've heard people express outrage about this story. Can you believe that guy? How dare he speak like that to Jesus? But as I really thought about it, I wondered, would I do the same thing? Jesus, you're my rabbi, my mentor, my teacher. I've walked with him. I've seen him do these amazing things and speak these amazing words. I've watched him literally mend bone and muscle and restore people to health. I would have been thinking that we're preparing for something big. Rome is toast. And now he's going to suffer many terrible things and be killed? What? The rug has just been pulled out from under Peter. And when our expectations go unmet, how do we feel? We feel disillusioned and confused and maybe disappointed. And when our expectations of Jesus are unmet, we feel, what do? No, Jesus, that's not right. I don't understand. I thought it was going to be different. No. Life was supposed to be different. You were supposed to heal me. You were supposed to get me that job. You were supposed to fix that relationship. That person was supposed to forgive me. And we may even try to undermine God's plans by taking things into our own hands. You shouldn't have let that happen. That's wrong. It shouldn't have gone that way. And we see Jesus have a very strong reaction to this from Peter. He says to Peter in verse 23, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." And again, this is the NLT, the New Living Translation, but some of our translations say, rather than you're a dangerous trap to me, you are a stone that could make me stumble, which is a word play on Peter's name that means rock. I'm sure Peter was totally taken aback by this response. He probably turned bright red. Maybe one of the disciples put a hand on his arm. Peter needed a handler. Here, Jesus is not literally calling Peter Satan or saying that he's possessed by demons. He's alluding to an event from earlier in his ministry. We can read about that in Matthew 4. Next, the devil took him to the rock, to the peak of a very high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. I will give it all to you, he said, if you will kneel down and worship me. Get out of here, Satan, Jesus told him, for the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him. The enemy offered Jesus the world, and he would not have to suffer and die to get it. Peter wasn't encouraging Jesus to abandon his plan or to derail God's whole mission. Peter didn't understand the mission. He was just looking at this from a human perspective and trying to protect Jesus. And he expected something different. And as we know, life presents us with many challenges. And our instinct is to protect ourselves from pain, to protect our people from pain, protect our kids from pain. And sometimes that's the right move, but more often than not, the way of Jesus, the thing that will line up with the teachings of Jesus, is going to be the harder thing, isn't it? Telling the truth. Being faithful, standing up for the vulnerable, admitting when you've made a mistake, apologizing, forgiving. Verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it, but if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. I picture Jesus stepping toward Peter in this moment, maybe putting a hand on his back or around his shoulder as if to say, things are still good between us. You haven't completely blown it. This is a teachable moment. Not only would Jesus have to suffer and die, the disciples would as well. And they surely couldn't have understood what this meant, could they? It sounded daunting, intimidating. Wait, we're going to have to give up our lives? Take up a cross? What cross exactly? Jesus is on a journey with his disciples, his learners. Remember the labyrinth image from last week that Meredith showed? The Christian life is a winding path. And the more we progress, the more we stay in step with God, the more he reveals himself to us along the way. That's how it works. And we can see ourselves in Peter, can't we? We get it wrong. We screw up. We take one step forward, 2 steps back. But Jesus draws us in. If we continue in faithfulness and in lifelong obedience like we saw last week, he reveals more about himself. 6 days later, after this event at Caesarea Philippi, Peter was invited to be part of the inner circle. Peter, James, and John, invited to the top of a mountain with Jesus, and Jesus showed them through the transfiguration, God's glory shining through him. You've seen my divinity now. I'll show you a little bit more. Here's my divinity on full display. Amazing, even after what had happened at Caesarea Philippi. Peter trusted Jesus even as he led him to a remote and strange location, and Jesus revealed more of himself. Through this powerful lesson, Peter boldly confessed that Jesus was Messiah, the Son of the living God, and Jesus revealed just what kind of Messiah he was. Peter took a couple of steps back when Jesus didn't meet the expectations that he had. But he faithfully stayed by Jesus' side, and Jesus included him in the group that got to view the transfiguration. We learned last week that one of the most powerful things about the life of Peter is that because he was the way he was, because he screwed up and had so many missteps, the people around him got to see a clearer picture of Jesus. They all grew in their trust and understanding. And again, that's probably why we get a really honest portrayal of Peter in the Gospels. The Gospels were written at least 60 years after the resurrection. Peter, according to church tradition, was crucified in AD 64. And so from the time of the resurrection to his death, Peter went around preaching. And Adam Hamilton, whom I quoted earlier, believes that Peter was really honest about himself and about his failings as he preached to believers. And I think this speaks so powerfully to the power of vulnerability, right? Nobody is interested in our perfect, squeaky clean version of our walk with Jesus, because that's not real. That's not real. I have felt the Spirit move more powerfully in my life when I've chosen to be vulnerable, when I've chosen to be honest about my weaknesses and my failings and my mess-ups than any other time in my life. There is power in vulnerability, and we see that in the following of Peter. Jesus is magnified in weakness. So Jesus taught his disciples, his learners, with a question at Caesarea Philippi, and we're going to continue on in that spirit today with some reflection questions. Our action step today will be reflection. We'll have an opportunity to talk more about these in your small groups if you would like later on in the week. Question 1 is the same question Jesus asked his disciples at Caesarea Philippi. Who do you say Jesus is? This is a question for all of us, though it can apply in different ways. Maybe you do believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, the deliverer of humanity, and maybe you're not there yet with Jesus. And I want to say to you, welcome. Our vision for this community is a place where learners of all stages feel safe and comfortable to learn and grow together. We're so glad you're here. And if you're not sure who Jesus is to you, put some words to that. If you think that he was a great man, a great teacher, a charismatic figure from history, but you're not quite sure that he was the Son of God, you're not quite sure about his divinity, dig into that. And if you have questions or a need of resources, contact the staff. We would love to help you. But if you do say that Jesus is the Son of the living God, the Messiah, if you are walking with him, who exactly do you say he is? Is he your liberator, your savior, your redeemer? And how can that be seen by other people in the ways that you're living? Would others have a clearer picture of Jesus by watching you? Do you understand that as a believer in Jesus, the suffering servant, that suffering is part of your story too? Who do you say Jesus is? Put some words to that. Question 2, in this cultural moment, 2022, in a time of empire and idol worship, not very much unlike the time of Peter, what idols do you need to confront in order to proclaim that Jesus is Messiah, Son of the living God? Ooh, this one. Idols, the things that we make more important than God, the things that we give most of our time, mental space, energy, and effort to. What idols? Your expectations about how life should be going, about how following Jesus should be going. Your leaders, your political party, money, power, a goal, a relationship. What idols do you need to confront in order to confess that Jesus is Messiah? And our last question, Jesus took Peter to Caesarea Philippi in order to ask him, who do you say that I am? So my question, where has Jesus taken you? Where are you being asked to boldly declare that he is Messiah? These times that we're living in church, they require boldness from the church. The church must assume this posture of boldness and believe that it will be honored. That's what we see with Peter. Because of his bold confession of faith, Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell will not conquer it." Again, that's the New Living Translation. Sometimes we'll see something like this, and this is the King James, so bear with me. "And also I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Language scholarship suggests that because the word "against" is not present in the original Greek, that this passage means that the gates of hell will not be able to withstand the church. Ancient gates were a defensive tactic, right? Objects to keep the enemy out. The realm of the underworld, the home of the dead, will not be able to withstand the advances of the church. I love that interpretation. Don't you? My whole life I've thought this passage meant that hell could not come against the church. But isn't it more powerful to see that the church is the one advancing on the enemy? The church need not fear even death. That is grounds for some boldness, church. Let's go. So good. Our boldness for Christ will be honored like Peter's, but this is key. If we are truly walking with Jesus and our heart is aligned with his, as we see with Peter in his lifelong, not perfect obedience, that boldness will be honored. We may screw up. We will. We're human beings, but if we're in step with Jesus, our boldness will be honored. And I don't mean boldness in the way of aggression or harshness. I mean love. We love so boldly. What do we have to fear? The powers of hell? The powers of death? No. We love. We stand with the oppressed. Stand with, next to. We hold each other up. We heal. We bind wounds. We comfort. We love so boldly that the powers of hell and all the death inside will not stand a chance. Where has Jesus called you to boldly declare that he is Messiah, Son of the living God? This cultural moment for sure, 2022. Where else specifically? Your family, your workplace, your relationships. Thank goodness for Peter, right? Because Peter was vulnerable with his preaching about himself. Because he was vulnerable with his friends, the gospel writers, we get to see a clearer picture of Jesus. A Jesus who is so much more than most people think he is. A fully human, fully divine Messiah. The deliverer and liberator of humanity. Peter's unmet expectations, his missteps, his misunderstandings and confusion allow us to see that Jesus is more than we could ever ask for or imagine, and that he is still willing to use us despite our failings. Would you bow with me?